Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Jewish Divorce Project. I'm your host, Noam Rauscher.
And I'm your host, Leeron Tal.
Join us as we kvetch
and kvel about Judaism and divorce from our perspective as two Jewish professionals and two divorce coaches.
and two Jewish parents with lots of experience and plenty of opinions. Welcome back to the Jewish Divorce Project, everyone. Here we are, episode 81. Slightly different location, but same dynamic duo, ready to come at you with some good divorce wisdom and knowledge. How you doing, Leeron?
I am great. I'm great. The sun is out again after a rainy weekend, so I'm happy.
I hear you. Yeah. You didn't do any fun stuff this weekend? No camping in the rain? You didn't
No
want to do that?
camping. No, I did not have the kids this weekend. I went to a cool event. I went to a fundraiser for the Sola Impact Center, which is this amazing facility that does all this work for underprivileged youth in the area in LA. It was a sneaker ball. So I got to be all dressed up and wear sneakers, and I've never been happier.
Is that like the policy? You're allowed to wear sneakers? Is
You're
that what it
supposed
is?
to wear, it's all about like rock your cool sneakers.
Oh,
So
gotcha.
I was
Okay.
like, I borrowed my son's Jordans that he wore for his bar mitzvah. Luckily,
These are some fancy
his
Jordans.
shoes, he's outgrown his shoes and now they fit me, which is awesome.
It's the joy of having young children, right? You can always borrow their
Oh my
clothes
God.
over and over and over again.
Well, when Liam has the same foot size as me, I'm going to buy him all the coolest shoes. 'Cause then they'll just be mine when he's
That's right. So you'll just recycle them
within
back
like a
to
few
yourself.
months, they grow out of them. Yeah.
The
That's
feet
the
grow,
new,
the
that's
shoes
like a
don't.
mom hack, parent hack.
I got to learn something like that. Right now, the boys, they borrow t-shirts of mine. Every now and then, Judah borrows a pair of sweatpants or something like that, and occasionally a sweatshirt, but it hasn't really been reciprocated. Like, I'm not capable of going into their drawers. They're not so generous with their clothing towards me. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, well, my son's 14 and he definitely dresses cooler than me. So I'm like trying to borrow his stuff.
Yeah, I hear
It's
you.
crazy now as he's gonna be taller than me soon. It's so weird.
Do you have big plans for Passover?
Passover at my parents' place in beautiful Topanga, just the family. There's gonna be probably three. My mom always, if she finds like a young single person that's here, she asks if they have family, if they don't. So we have all these awesome people that have just joined our holidays that'll be there. I'm sure she's found a few new ones this year.
We're heading back to Jersey, so that'll be a good time for all of us all, I think. Yeah,
Oh, are you excited to go?
I am. It's really nice. It's turned out to be a great tradition for me and the boys to fly back for Jersey or fly back for Passover to Jersey, which is generally where we go. And
Yeah.
it's just where all the family is, and it's a really nice
Oh,
experience. Yeah,
that's gonna be so awesome.
I think
You're gonna
so.
get all your family goodness all at once. Do you have a big family? Does everyone live there or fly
Well, I
in?
think it's going to be 3 out of the 4 children. My brother's out of state with his wife and daughter. I'm not sure that they're coming. I should check, but I don't think they are. But that's the way it kind of has been for the past couple of years, and we wish they could come. I would love for them to come. We would love to see them, but sometimes the plans just don't work out. But it is
Yeah.
good enough just for my soul in that way, and the boys really like it too. And it's nice also, like they grew up in California, and I would, giving them a chance to visit the East Coast is a little bit of, them getting to know me a little bit more and
Oh
know
yeah.
the environment and being there, and it's nice. I'm actually
Do
really
you become like all Jersey again when you're there? Because you don't seem to have an
well,
accent
because I'm
or
not
like,
from Jersey. I'm from Connecticut originally. My whole
oh
family
yeah, that's
migrated to
right.
Jersey.
That's right. That's right.
For some reason, Jersey became our Mecca, and I don't understand why. But like, it is what it
Hmm.
is. They all love
You
Jersey. It's
seem like
probably
you
because
could be from Jersey.
it's the New England thing or the Northeast thing, the tri-state
Yeah.
area stuff. We adapt really well. I could pull on an accent and an attitude if I needed it, which is why I'd rather live out in California, so I don't have to.
You could do East Coast Jew really well, but you just prefer not to.
How did Passover work out in your settlement agreement? Do you have the kids every Passover, or is it just for
No,
this year?
we alternate. So it's actually crazy because we had like the ideal situation where it was like our two families came together. We would have Passover with 30 people, the whole family, all the cousins. So it was hard to split. So the original plan was that we rotate the first night, but my family just took it upon themselves. They all said, we don't want to do it without the boys. Whenever it's his year, we'll just do a second night. And that was huge. Israelis don't really, there is no
Right?
second night.
No. Passover 7 days and there's only one Seder. It's not eight
Yeah.
and two Seders like in the States.
So yeah, so like this year we're doing the second night. And on the first night, I kind of, if someone invites me, I'll go. If not, I'm like, it's okay, you know. Yeah.
Right.
So it's been really flexible and lovely. And his family, they don't do that though. So if they don't have them, the boys don't go, which is
Really?
fine. It is
So
what it is. They're
wait,
not, they
they don't
didn't
do
want to do a
Seder, they
second
don't do
night.
second night.
They don't do a second night.
They don't do
ever.
second night.
Yeah.
What was that like for you the first time you didn't do Seder with the boys?
It was so weird.
Yeah.
I went with my parents. We went with like family friends that invited us. And I was just there. I actually just drank a shit ton of Manischewitz. That's what I did. I had
by
no
yourself.
Children to watch at first. I was
Nothing
just
like the
like
blackberry.
so sad. And then I was watching my parents. I was like, they're just like drinking and having fun. I was like, that's it. That's what I need to do right now.
There are a
So
lot of people who think though that like if you can't do the holiday with your kids, that it's a total loss and they feel really bad and they beat themselves up. I mean, I remember even just adjusting to Shabbat, right? The first couple months of divorce was really tough because it felt just like the house was so empty and what do I do with myself?
yeah.
And I wanted to bless the boys and all that stuff. And it's just not easy to get past. How do you end up reconciling that, right? I mean, especially if you only do one night Seder and you want to
Yeah.
be able to be there with the kids, how do you end up reconciling that?
Sorry, my dog found a squeaky
Biggie,
ball. I have to take care of that.
biggie.
Biggie. Okay, you're not going to be in this podcast. Let's go in here. I'm sorry about that. She's not here anymore.
It's okay. Don't worry.
Um,
Kids and dogs.
yes. No, I actually have found it's been really nice to be able to find new traditions when I don't have the kids and really try to do something. I want to make sure though, I don't really feel like being around other people's children.
Yeah.
So I'm like, what can I do that is adults only? And I've made some friends throughout the years that don't have kids, that, you know, it's nice to have those friends that don't have kids or that are still single to be able to spend those moments with too. Cause like,
Right.
being around, I've just learned enough times that as much as I love my friends and I'm so grateful that they invite me and they want to include me, if I'm sitting there and all the kids are like, where am I again, Liam? And, you know, and then it just makes me miss them too much.
Yeah. You
And the
kind
whole
of have
time
to
I'm
take
like,
your
oh, I
mind
wish
off
they
of
were
it.
here. Oh, they would have had fun doing that. And it was just like, not, you know,
For me,
so
I had to end up reconciling that, it's just one day, right? There are plenty other special days, and just because it's a holiday doesn't make it, the idea is that it's more special than the rest, but it doesn't have to be, right? And you don't have to put all the
yeah.
weight on that. And you can always find an opportunity because what we're talking about, I think, is quality time. And for kids, I think it automatically or automatically, that's like two words, ultimately
Yeah.
and automatically combined. But like, I wonder if for kids, like, it just adds up to quality time. It's not necessarily about the holiday. Like, sure, like that comes with certain sights and smells. And at the same time, like it's really just a matter of being able to spend time with mom or dad in that way.
Yep.
Um, so I wonder if it's really about the holiday or if it's just about quality time and something that I think is a good recommendation for liberation, right? Since Passover is about liberation, particularly liberating ourselves from mental slavery, right? And
Mm-hmm.
things that enslave us in that way spiritually, is the idea that kind of we have to be able to spend all this time with our kids and beating ourselves up over it, right? There's no reason for that. It can be a really wonderful time. And if you're not with your kids because of the divorce, then you're not with your kids because of the divorce.
Mm-hmm.
But you can make the most of it. It can be something significant for you, which equally matters, right? Your own spiritual liberation as a parent.
Yep.
And then it can be, something else at another time that you can spend with your kids. And it doesn't have to be Passover on those first or second nights. You can always talk to your kids about searching for chametz in different ways. You can always, teach them about liberation and freedom, and their power in that way. There are different options for it. And just because you can't spend it with them on that particular holiday doesn't make you a bad parent, doesn't mean that, you've done something wrong. Yes, divorce probably stings a little bit more during that time, but there'll be other times that you get to spend with them in real concentrated quality effort. So,
Yeah. And it gives you such a feeling of really savoring and enjoying the time you do have them. I think that's something that we almost get as like a blessing in disguise, right? When we end up with shared custody versus having your kids all the time. And that's what happens. Sometimes we do kind of take advantage of those moments when you're married and you're together every day and with the kids. And But when you know your time is limited, you really cherish those moments more, which
That's
I think
exactly
is
right.
pretty like a nice benefit that we don't really talk about
Right.
much that kids receive.
Right.
Like I think my kids see their father way more quality time with him now than they did when we were living in the same home.
That's right. And it should be more concentrated quality time in that way because they're just focused in there. And in that way, because you enjoy the quality time when it's not Passover and on the holidays, right? You do kind of make those celebrations and those holidays irrelevant, which is
Mm-hmm.
kind of the theme of our conversation today with our guest that's coming up, right? The idea of irrelevancy, and like
Yeah.
what really matters ultimately, right? It's the quality time. It's not necessarily the holiday, right? Make the
Yep.
holiday irrelevant because you're spending so much other good quality time and giving your kids the attention they deserve that when it comes to Passover, it's just a Monday or a Tuesday night that you're missing,
Yeah.
right? And not
Yeah.
anything,
Yep.
big for that matter. Should we do that?
Well,
Should we get to our guest? Should we welcome them in and
let's
like
do it.
do
Yeah.
away with
Is
this
she here? Is she
anticipation?
ready?
She's here. She's ready to go. We're going to
Let's do
welcome her
it.
in. No more teasers right now because we're just going to get right into it. We'll welcome her in, and Leeron will be happy to read her bio and share all this wonderful information.
Yes, I will.
We're going to welcome in our
And
guest,
here we
Andrea
go.
Hipps. Hi,
Hello.
Andrea.
Hi,
How are you?
Andrea.
Lovely to see both of you.
Lovely to see
Lovely
you
to see
too.
you.
Thank you for joining
Well,
us today.
thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Well,
Lee,
Andrea, to introduce everyone to Andrea, if you don't know her. And is it Andrea or Andrea? I know people say it differently.
Andrea, thank you. But I'll
Andrea.
answer to any. Yeah.
Okay. So Andrea Hipps is a certified divorce coach and author who helps parents all along the divorce continuum resolve their divorce debris and create healthier two-address families. She's the author of an internationally best-selling book, The Best Worst Time of Your Life: 4 Practices to Get You Through the Pain of Divorce, which outlines the 4 practices you need to create wholeness and healing for you and your kids before, during, and after divorce. As a regular contributor to our nation's divorce recovery conversation, she's been featured on NBC, ABC, Fox, and the CW discussing how we can do better, how we can do divorce better for the sake of ourselves and our families. Amen.
tell me
That's
about it.
all I
I'm
can
in
say.
Sella.
Andrea, I'm so excited you're here. I've been following you for a while now, and your amazing summits that you put on, and I know you have one coming up. So, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. I appreciate the perspective that you guys take to try to introduce some new perspectives and more grounded ways of handling divorce. I just feel like if our culture is going to have divorce, we have a mandate to do it better.
That's a really good point. And the idea of forgiveness and forgetting is really huge within the Jewish tradition if we're ever going to move on and, as being spiritual beings and achieve the type of growth that we need. Both those things are actually really crucial. Yeah,
Yeah, and they feel really impossible too when you're
they
moving
do.
through a situation where someone has hurt you in some small or very profound way, and it's not insignificant, and it's not as simple as just telling people you need to move on, which I think is what people outside of the divorce community kind of looking in on us think. So why is this so hard for you? Why can't you just get along? Why can't you be the people that we would expect you to be? But it's far more complicated than that.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the most kind of misconceptions in divorce is, and we're all coaches and we work with clients, and you do have this sense of once he's gone, it's done in our relationship, and it's like the real hard part is after. I'm finding in learning that new relationship, right? We were just talking
completely.
about.
I was just talking to a client about that today. This idea that when we're moving through divorce, the balance of our attention is really 10% emotional when we're going through divorce, although it feels much bigger. It really is only 10% because it's 90% logistical. We're figuring out all of the stuff with our attorney, with our mediator, with our custody arrangements, with all of the situations that we're figuring out. 90% of our brain is working on the logistics. Only 10% is working on the emotions. When you get through your divorce and you finalize it, 100% of the space is freed up for the emotions. There aren't any more logistics. You figured it out. And so there's this new flood that comes in, like you said, even more crushing than what you were in before, and kind of surprising because you would think at the end I'd be done, but I'm not really done. I'm just getting started in some ways.
Do you offer, I mean, in that way, because it feels like it's so much of a game of survival, right? When you're in the divorce and you're dealing with the financial and the legal elements of it, do you often find that your clients come back with certain like impacted emotions, that there are things that they just didn't grieve about or didn't emote before or express while they were going through that survival period, that now that just kind of comes out all at the end?
Yeah, absolutely. I think research shows that we can really only entertain new thoughts, not unless and until we feel safe. And I think for some people, safety doesn't really feel secure, even though, it may even be a false sense of safety that you have after divorce, but you feel a lot safer after you've gone through the divorce and you have things settled. And at that point, your brain is a little more open to experimenting with and introducing new ways of thinking and new ways of feeling, frankly. So yeah, I do think a lot of it gets put on hold because it is a game of survival. It's also it's sort of a saturated moment when you're going through divorce, right? It's just it's all too saturated with all of the things going on. And so once you've hit that eclipse of I actually have the financial and the legal realities defined for me now, there is a very big playground that opens up with regard to your emotions.
I wonder if guys actually address that in the same way that women do. I don't think they do. I wonder if guys even deal with the emotions at all. And I keep arguing whenever I have male clients that they need to be in therapy at the same time that they're going through divorce, just so they can kind of go through these things clearly, right? Emotions are wonderful. We should all be in touch with them and learn how to articulate them in safe and healthy ways, right? Without getting overwhelmed by them. Guys do a particularly,
Right.
I find, poor job at doing that in general. And having someone who can, you could be with a lawyer and you could be with a therapist, and it's all very costly in the end, really. If we're
Right.
speaking honestly about it, but I think it is
Totally.
for your health, right, is really what we're talking about. And then just, again, having the clearness of mind to be able to make the decisions that are less emotional, less fear-based, right, less anger-based, is really kind of so valuable to everyone. And I wonder the difference between men and women in terms of how they're taking care and seeking out the help of professionals during that crazy time.
Yeah, I see that too. I probably have a 70-30 split with females to males. And I feel like with women, the dominant emotion on top of the emotions that already exist, the dominant emotion is, I shouldn't be feeling this emotion.
Right.
Right. Like I don't understand why I'm crying about this thing. It's
Right.
like, well, of course you're crying. Your life just blew up. Right.
Right.
But there is this feeling like I shouldn't, because I cognitively understand that my relationship has deteriorated and I'm moving through a divorce. I should therefore have no more feelings, right, popping up about it.
Right.
I think for men, the thing that I noticed that's distinct to them is almost an inability to access the emotion in favor of the logistics. It's almost like they appreciate having so many logistics to work out that the emotions catch up to them. And I'm often encouraging them, how do we move this conversation from the head to the heart? And sometimes when I say that, that's when a tear will pop up in the eye and we actually get into the deep stuff. But it is tricky, as you say.
For me, it's whenever I ask them about the kids. You go for the kids,
Yes.
and that's when the tears
Right.
start coming. Right? That's
Right, exactly.
what can you do about this, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. The women just walk in and start crying many times.
Yes. Yeah. And I think with the emotions, the thing that I'm really encouraging people to do when they're moving through coaching is, how do we set a projection much further down the line than right when I'm meeting them? But the projection is ultimately, I'd like for you to live in a place, and I think they also want to live in a space, but they don't have the words for it when we first meet, of making your former partner irrelevant. And it's a little bit of a weird word for people because it feels rude, right? If I think you're irrelevant, it's like how is it possible for the father of my children or the mother of my children to be irrelevant?
Right.
It's not that we're making them irrelevant in this sort of cast off way.
No.
We're making them irrelevant in that they often play center stage role for people. And we're trying to really figure out how to get them on audience participation only. Does that make sense?
It makes so much sense because we finally reached that moment, and it's taken 6 years. And I realized it took him having a new fiance and a baby. I don't know. It changed everything, that all of a sudden I didn't even realize that for 5 years literally every day he took up space in my mind.
Mhm.
The worrying about the kids, the anger towards him, the nasty whatever it was, every day was in my mind in some way, which would make me so mad that I would let that happen. Right. And I did, but it couldn't stop. It took also him being happy and me being in a road of being happy and like really getting there. And it's just, I almost had to like check in and be like, is it okay that I'm not like, is it okay that we're cool? It was a weird transition.
Yes, because you get so used to your story. Yes.
To a volatile relationship. But that is
Yeah.
exactly, I didn't know what the word was, like acceptance. It's irrelevant. That is what we are now. Emotionally.
Yeah, which it's a happy, comfortable distance, right? It's irrelevant to me. I look out on my neighbor's house here every morning. It's irrelevant to me what she's up to. I don't not care about her. I hope she's having a great day. I hope things are going wonderfully over there. But most of what's happening over there is irrelevant to my experience. And when we're talking about being relevant, we're just saying, what is the subject at hand? And for most people going through divorce, the subject at hand is the misdeeds, misbehaviors, misactions of their former partner or soon to be former partner. That is the most relevant thing. And in part, that's natural. We can't stop it. But in part, it's also a very good coping strategy for people to not have to, or to be able to procrastinate making themselves the most relevant subject at hand. Right. So if I'm able to totally myopically focus on my former partner and their misdeeds, then I don't have to confront the fact that I'm not starting my life, that I'm not entering into what life 2.0 is going to look like for me. If I can stay focused on you, then I don't have to focus on me. And that's, it's sort of we're trying to let go of that coping strategy. But in order to do so, we have to be willing to look at our own lives, which can be, less than easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
It also sounds a lot like, because I would do this when I was working in the pulpit, I would think about like all these people that are doing, really innovative things that I would in some ways get jealous of that I wanted to do as well, right? And couldn't for any number of limitations, reasonable limitations. And I had to forgive myself for that. And then I also got to a point in realizing that the more I ended up focusing on what they were doing, right, even if it was good and beautiful, it was still also a distraction to what I was doing. And it sounds a lot like what you're talking about now, that you could spend all this time worrying about what your ex is doing with the kids or in their home or with their own life. And some of that might be worthwhile. Like you have to be a parent as well. You have to know what's going on with your kids. At the same time, you still need to trust your ex, but trusting them also makes them irrelevant in that way, because now you are really capable of focusing without the distraction of what they're doing, and now focusing on what you want to do and the life that you want to lead.
Yeah. I remember meeting with a spiritual director when I was going through my own divorce, which was well over a decade ago now. And I remember she said to me, "Do you love your former partner?" And I was like, "I think so. I don't know. I don't
Weird
want to
question.
anymore." I know I was on the receiving end of an unwanted divorce. It was a little messy. And she said, "Love is wanting deep peace and freedom for another person, no matter what that means for you." And that line has stuck with me for years. Obviously, I'm still repeating it to you today, but it plays in so importantly when we think about what does it mean to let go of someone, is to realize it's not about how I factored in. And gosh, I really want it to be. I probably to this day still want it to be. But ultimately, the gift of love to another person is to allow them an experience of deep peace and freedom, possibly without me. And we do that all the time with our kids, right? We learn how to send them to school. We learn how to send them to college and to adulthood. We're learning how to give that deep peace and freedom. It's just harder to translate it sometimes to someone who's hurt us.
Well, yeah, because it's kind of where you're at in that grief cycle. If you're still angry at them, there's no way to get there. It's really once that anger, and I can see that. I feel like my ex just was stuck in anger for a really long time. And it's so hard when one person has moved on to acceptance already and that person's just still angry. Yeah. It's hard to want, you don't wish bad upon them, but it's hard to bring yourself to want anything good for them when you're that
it is hard. But it's also that idea of we that I think is so hard when we're leaving a relationship, because we spend all of our time in our marriage, most of our time in our marriage, trying to get on the same page. What are we thinking about this kid? How do we want to approach next weekend? What are we going to do about your family? We're always kind of trying to generate this shared understanding and, frankly, a consensus about our shared understanding. When the minute divorce enters the space, we go from we to me. But people still try to operate from the we. And I try to tell people there is a moment in time, and as the minute divorce starts getting mentioned, that you have left we. And you're going to have two very distinct perspectives, often perspectives that are at odds with each other, but different perspectives. And the goal is to no longer try to merge them. That is a mind game for people because they really want to be on the same page with the other person. We have to. We're raising kids together. But you know what? If I talk to two people who are married, they probably wouldn't be in consensus all the time about how we're supposed to deal with XYZ. They're just not. Right. And so our successfulness in moving on, whether we call it acceptance, forgiveness, irrelevance, is our ability to allow our former partner to have their own experience of life and to allow them their own perspective of it.
Interesting too. I mean, you said the word acceptance several times. That's the fifth stage of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's, right? 5 stages of grief, starting with anger as well. And there's, or at least starting with denial, then there's anger, bargaining, and depression in between.
Right.
And acceptance is really big. And we know that it's not a linear thing. And we know that forgiveness is when you stop. I think the dictionary definition of it is when you stop being angry at someone. And thinking about all those things, they've got to be the Venn diagram, right, has got to have huge overlap in that way. And that acceptance has got to be a form of forgiveness because you're not allowing the power of that person to really rule over you in that way.
Yeah, it's a tricky word, that acceptance, because people are like, I just need to accept it, right? Like I hear that a lot. I'm sure you hear that a lot from your guys. I just need to accept it.
It's like, get over it.
A lot of times, yeah, get over it. But a lot of what we're asking our souls to do is accept something that is entirely unacceptable. Right. I just have to accept that they're awful with the kids. I just have to accept that they're not going to pay me the money they're supposed to. Those are unacceptable. Right. Why are we working at trying to accept them? Right. So it's almost like our souls know this isn't worth accepting. This isn't right to accept this. But how do we come up with a different meaning or version? And I always, tell people when I talk about acceptance, which I put very closely next to forgiveness in conceptual, ideas, is acceptance is letting someone get away with what they were likely going to get away with anyway. It's very low level. It's very base. It's not gorgeous. It's very base, but it's getting you on the ladder.
Yeah. It's so funny you say that. It's so funny you say that because I was also just thinking about what you said about the love for the other person. And I can't remember that phrase, but the love part sounds like the adult way of doing it, right? About like looking at them like an adult, and this acceptance part kind of feels like looking at them as like a child in some way, like they're going to do and they're going to get away with something and you're going to love them nonetheless, which is all about that freedom in terms of being an adult.
It sounds petty and like and nudgy, but you know what, that is really how we all feel inside.
It's and our freedom lies at the point where we realize you're going to have an affair. There's no moral court that's going to stop you from it. You're going to raise our children in a way that is so far off base from what we decided we were going to do and what I think is best. And you're going to get away with it unless there's a true health and safety issue. Then I'm going to pursue that. Right. But like you can feed them Cheetos for dinner and there's no court that's going to tell you to stop. There is so much that we have to let them get away with. And we're not used to doing that in any other spot in our life. We don't let the phone company get away with it. We don't let vendors get away with it. We're always calling people to account. And the true way to acceptance, I believe, this is just, again, my own philosophy in divorce, is to allow them to get away with what they were going to get away with anyway, and allow them to be who they were going to be anyway. Because it's that battling up against, you shouldn't be angry, you shouldn't be treating the kids like this, you shouldn't be acting like you should that we waste all of our energy on that.
So perfectly stated and so true. Noam, you're like processing it all.
I mean, I'm thinking about this statement of amazing, of love, right? And allowing them to be free in that way, right? You would have to be a real jerk to not get behind that idea, right?
course.
I mean, Andrea, if you could repeat it one more time, just for my own
Yeah.
education, right? The idea
Yeah.
of loving someone in that way, how you
Love
reframed it.
is love is wanting someone to have deep peace and freedom, no matter what it means for you.
It's an incredibly adult and human thing to say, right? You have to be really mature in order to be able to do that. But you'd have, like I said, you'd have to be a real jerk not to get behind an idea like that, right? You'd have to want for someone to have a shitty life in some way or to have a shitty day, in order to justify your happiness. And what this does is says people are people, right? They're just human beings. They're doing their own thing.
Yeah, and we have scripts in our heads for what we think our former partner, let's be specific. We have a script for our former partner that they're not reading off of, right? They should show up more. They should be more enthusiastic. They should lay off, whatever it is that we're upset about. And we want to give them a script. And we're frustrated that when we give them the script, they don't read from it. But I always try to encourage my clients, put yourself on the receiving end of their scripts because they have one too. They think you're too high strung. They think you're way too permissive with the kids, or they think you're way too harsh. So they're going to give you their script. Now you try to read from it. And they laugh because it's ridiculous. No one wants to read from anybody else's script, right? And so we have to go off script entirely. Parent, live, and love the way that is natural, meaningful, and important to you. Period. Also, they're going to do the same. It will look very different. It's supposed to.
So Andrea, what exactly, you're working with a client and they come in and you see that like they're distracted by what's going on in their ex's life, right? You realize that they're going through the stages of grief in some way or not, but they've got this, idea in their head in which their ex are just occupying this big space, right? They're living there rent free. How do you get them to this stage of forgiveness? How do you get them to actually making their ex irrelevant in that way?
It's a lot of steps along the way, but the first is you have to commit to making them irrelevant because some people that word really doesn't work for them and they feel like there's something wrong with doing it. So it's first, starting with a commitment to doing it. Then I think it's starting to, again, the next very uncomfortable part is that we to me, where you have to become purposefully, beautifully self-centered. Right? We're not used to doing that in our faith communities. We are in service of others, right? We live to serve. And so to put yourself in a sort of a silo where you're like, I'm just going to care for me right now. And I'm going to trust that God is going to care for my kids that are when they're in the care of my former partner, as well as my former partner. That's a very, very weird feeling. That's a weird feeling, right? But we have to sort of get into that space. And then the third part I would say is really eliminating the pull. So when we think about human development, we have two pulls in life. One is to autonomy, like I want to do what the heck I want to do. And one is to attachment, right? I want to be connected to other people. And we spend most of our lives trying to get the right balance in that. It's important to figure out that balance in life. But I would say during divorce, the people I watch who are the most successful, and by successful, I mean efficient in collapsing the recovery timeline because you don't get out of it, right? You still have to go through it, but they're more efficient in getting through the timeline are people who don't try to balance that autonomy and attachment. They lean all the way into autonomy. And again, that feels weird. Like because the message we're fed in divorce culture publicly is you need to be besties with your former partner.
Right.
That is impossible for almost everybody at the beginning.
Yeah.
The people who do it well, who are honest and I'm not talking about people in People magazine. I'm talking about real people who do it, get very autonomous, very detached, very out of each other's business. They get very divorced. And then they decide, instead of, when you think about divorce, it's like we're connected, like I've got all my fingers here together. And then we get divorced. Oh, we still have to be connected. So I'm just going to disconnect this marriage finger. Oh, and then we're going to be besties. No, you burned me. You hurt me. You dropped me. You abandoned me, whatever it is. Instead, break all of the ties, disconnect everything. And then from that space, decide, do I, can I, should I, do I want to trust you here? Do I want to have a relationship here? I remember the first time that I asked my former partner about his work. It was years after we got divorced because I don't care about your work. Your work's not relevant to me. I hope you have work because we have a financial arrangement that we have to keep up. But I remember when I asked, I was ready to say, I'm interested in your life outside of the business of our children right now. And that was a really special place to be. But I had to tear completely apart in order to reconnect on a very small strand. Does that make sense?
It
Yeah.
makes completely sense. And I think about, the different levels of separation that you're talking about. And Leeron, I'm curious to know about the levels of separation that you went through, right? Divorce is the very first one, and that's the most major, right? It's the legal and the
Right.
spiritual marriage breaking up. But then there's also the separation, like you're talking about, of, well, your lives and your souls, right? And I think about how much social media is entwined in that. And one of the biggest step for me, or at least what I saw as being the biggest step, was just distancing from my ex on social media altogether. I didn't want to look at her pictures. I didn't want to see pictures pop up. I didn't want to see who her friends were, anything like that. So I blocked. And it was the best way of doing it because I couldn't prevent it any other way, right? And so,
Right.
that can hurt and I had to explain it, but at the same time, like blocking it was really just the best way of doing it because I didn't want to see any of that stuff and I didn't want to end up being triggered. And I knew that it was just ultimately going to take time and being that way of being like, okay, she's going to live her life and carve out something new. And so am I. And that also gave me the space to do it. Like I could share of myself on social media, which I don't necessarily recommend for anyone to do. Certainly not in searching for spiritual
In
fulfillment or
divorce.
meaning in your life, right? In divorce.
Right.
But it did make it a little bit easier. Like you think about how much social media takes over your life and how it meshes so much in some ways, carving out that space for privacy was really crucial in that way.
Incredibly wise choice to do. Yeah. And it's in service. That pulling away is in service of what I imagine has become an ability for you to reconnect over time.
Oh,
that
yeah.
I have to break what was in order to create what will be. And that's what I'm sure you've heard Byron Katie's work, right? Where she talks about the three questions. Is it my business? Is it their business or is it God's business? And most of us spend time in others' business and in God's business. It's a sport for me, right? I love being in other people's business and I surely
Love
want to be in
gossip.
God's business because I think I do a great job operating on his behalf, right? So when we are able to kind of use that filter of, is this my business? Now we start to think who they date is our business because they interact with our child. So therefore we need to have a say in that. You can make an argument for that, but truly, it is not your business. It is your business to help your children adapt to it. It is your business to help your children learn to have a voice in it. It's your business to help your children make a connection if they choose to with that person. That's for sure your business. But you know what? Who they date, how long they date, how quick they introduce, all those things. Most of the time, you're going to be on the receiving end of needing to repair that as opposed to needing to influence that. And I think that's where I really encourage my clients to be very honest. You don't control anything. You have influence over quite a bit. But the thing that you are going to operate the most in is parenting, reparenting, and overparenting, things that got undone while your kid was elsewhere.
You
Get in. I feel like you are just telling my life story.
You touched on the idea.
Well, it's exhausting.
You touched on the idea of gossip, right? Like we all like knowing what's going on in other people's worlds, and Jews are no exception to that, right? Like we love the idea of gossip so much so that we have this concept of lashon hara, which is that gossip is bad. It's the evil tongue. And the funny part about it is that this is what I learned, and I'd have to check it on ChatGPT just to be sure, but gossip comes from the idea of God sib, which is to say that like people used to gather around in faith-based communities and discuss what was going on from a value-oriented position of saying, are these in line with the values of the community? And in some ways, it was a way of like creating like a social safety net, or at least a personal safety net of, helping people out, right? If there's an unfortunate thing that happens to someone, we all know about it. We can respond and try to be a community, but it broke down and now it's gossip and it's just
naturally.
People. Right, but
naturally became gossip. Because can you imagine they're like telling the story of like so and so, Moishe, was with the neighbor or whatever, and they're talking, and then it's like, oh, did you hear? How could you not?
That's my point. It lost all real kind of like spiritual help and value, and just became about people talking about each other.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
It's all very interesting to get ourselves involved in other people's business. And I think we don't have a real we don't have a really good model for how to do that in a way. Like people talk about, oh, well, you need to gray rock, right? A narcissist and not talk with them, or you
Right.
need to just detach or just disconnect or stop the relationship. Most of us who have children, that's not a privilege that we're allowed to operate from, right? We still have to create points of contact. And so we don't have a really good way of being in that autonomy attachment pull with
Right.
someone like this. So it's fair if we all feel weird doing it, it's because it's weird to do it.
It is. Your description though, and maybe it was the visual for me with your hands with all the different connections. You know, it's so interesting because I totally can see that reconnection piece being so you realize that moment. It can be something so small. I know that I remember when we just split up, I did have that feeling of like, we could be friends. We could still do Shabbat dinner all together once in a while. That was my goal, to be able to have him over and join us and all do Shabbat dinner together. We did it once and it was the worst night of my life. We did it once and it was just, I couldn't take him. I was in my new house and he was like disciplining the kids in my house at my table. And I was like, dude, you're a guest now. Like, that's not something in me. It was just, I was like, not ready for it. Well, skip to 5 years later, there was something about the 5th year. The energy was really interesting around our family and the kids start getting nostalgic more. I don't know why, but they had brought up Hanukkah and how it's been 5 years since we've done Hanukkah with Ima and Abba together. And I was like, you know what? I felt ready. And so for one of the nights, I had invited him and their stepmom and the baby all to my house for Hanukkah. And they brought gifts for the kids and I brought gifts and they opened gifts together. And the kids were beaming. It was lovely. It felt so good, authentically good. And his gifts were even better than my gifts. And I didn't even have an ounce of being mad about it. I was like, good for them. They can buy them the expensive shoes. Works for me. Like, it was such a moment that I really reflected on afterwards. I think I came on the podcast and talked about it. I also really enjoyed watching him gobble up all the latkes I made that he missed. That was fun too. But no, it was such a great moment. And it's exactly what you're talking about. That was me reaching out for the kids' sake, but it really created a beginning of a new relationship. I don't know that I would go so far as to call it a friendship yet, but a different relationship.
Yeah, and it had the two elements that I think are really important in our post-divorce language, which is most of the time we try to be beautiful, right? Like, I'm going to invite them over. That's really beautiful. But in my heart, I'm maybe not ready for it. So it's not necessarily true, right? So true and beautiful to me are the two elements that we're trying to, no pun intended, get married. So even when we're talking about our former partner, if we say, I never say anything bad about my former partner. Okay, great. They know that you hate them. So it doesn't really matter if you say it or not, right? So we try to be beautiful, but we're not being true. So we're trying to figure out, how can I be both true and beautiful? So to say, I think your dad loves you with a big, big heart. That's true and it's beautiful, right? Your dad is awesome. That's being beautiful, but you don't really believe it, right? So when we can operate in our integrity, which I think is what you did 5 years later, right? When you went to the Shabbat early, whoa, this is beautiful, but it sure ain't true. I do not want to have peace with you. Get the hell out of my house, right? There's this very, right? But in that 5th year, when you were offering it, it was true. I kind of want you here because I see the delight it brings for my kids, and it brings me joy to know that you're bringing them joy, and I have space for that now. And it's beautiful. Oh my gosh, I love this. I will not ever ask my clients to do anything that is not true and beautiful. Wait for that. Wait for that, because it's worth it. And you can still be true and beautiful along the way in small ways as you head to the big way of welcoming them into, holy holidays with you.
Let me ask you about something that I think sounds true and beautiful. And let me tell you I wonder if it's necessary for your practice. In Judaism, we have this concept of tshuva. When someone does something wrong, right, either an affront to God or an affront to a human being, there's this process of making it right, of accountability and ownership, of admitting it, of and then learning from the experience so much so that when it happens again, we act differently, right? That's the point about
Right.
spiritual growth. And many would argue that in order to provide forgiveness to someone to eventually get to a place of irrelevancy or forgetfulness about, them in your life, that you would need to have this element of tshuva. They would need to come and take accountability for what they've done. And in divorce, that's sometimes impossible. Like you're just never going to get that based on the personality of your ex, right? No court's going to mandate it, right? The kids aren't going to demand it either, right? And you could demand it till you're blue in the face and they could just tell you to blow off, right? So how does that factor in? Like, do you say to your clients, like, you better work for that. Like, you better hope that they come forward and give you that give you that apology, right? Or are you just kind of like, the apology doesn't matter. This isn't about them.
Yeah, I lean more towards your second answer only because I have seen people wait for an apology that ultimately didn't matter. People hold on to the apology as this is the thing that's going to fix it. And I will tell you, you will get that apology and you will realize I didn't need it, or it didn't fix anything. It wasn't really the apology. What you needed was for it to never have happened.
Right.
And you don't get that
Bottom line.
opportunity.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And so I think divorce is a space where people have to create their own sense of closure. And that, again, is not a we experience. It's not a consensus experience. I know some people try to have ceremonies, and I think that's really beautiful. Sometimes I don't think it's very true, but I think they do try to do it. And I support that. But I think most of the time, the closure that you are going to offer is when you can, independent of your former partner, land a story that you are willing to live in. Right. So most of the time people are like, I don't know what happened in my divorce, or he was this way, or she wasn't this way. And they have these very kind of sweeping and I think unpleasant stories about each other. I was just working with a client last week about their story. And their story was very, I don't know, it was ugly. It wasn't lovely at all. And I said, can we give it a glow up and still have it be true? And we came up with, we were two people who developed unhealthy patterns of relating early on that ultimately became unsurpassable. That's a landed story.
Right.
It doesn't require anybody to be sorry.
Right.
It's simply two people who got in a spot where they were unhealthy with each other and they continued it. And then the thing that was really special broke. So when you're talking about in your Jewish tradition of trying to make amends, that to me sort of aligns from a Christian perspective of reconciliation, right? I can forgive you and not reconcile with you. Forgiving says, I'm going to move on from the moment with you. Reconcile says, and I'd like to enter into a relationship and trust you again. That's never going to happen. And nor should it even be a goal. I think it's beautiful enough to say, I'm going to let you get away with this, and I'm going to allow God's revenge, punishment, justice, karma, whatever you want to put on it, to work itself out in your life, because my preoccupation with it keeps me from living the fullness of my own life.
Right.
Does that kind of get at what you're talking about?
Very much so. Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head, right? The difference between reconciliation, right, which is about, and making amends, which is about, building the relationship back up, and forgiveness, which is really just about moving on and saying, I'm not going to let this have power over me. And you don't really need someone to apologize for that, right? You just have to say, I'm not going to be angry about this anymore, and figure out what that life looks like for you.
Yeah. I would really encourage your listeners, if they're waiting for an apology, to realize, like, just almost sort of mentally put yourself in the space of getting it. Most of the time that apology is going to be thin.
Yeah.
Meaning the work the person had to do to say it matters way more than the apology that they gave you. And the work you had to do to even hear it or be in a space to receive it had a lot more to do with it than the moment. So to me, I don't know.
Demanding an
I just
apology
don't want to
also
hear.
demanding an apology is
go
also
ahead.
not going to help. I think there's research that actually says that like the moment you ask for an apology, the less value it really has, right? Because you had to
Right.
remind that person to do it. And in thinking about that, you're offering a very godly perspective, right? That God doesn't demand apologies from us. We think that God demands apologies, which is why we do sacrifices in the Jewish tradition, or say whatever prayers or whatever it is. But really what we're hoping for is just forgiveness for God when we haven't made an apology, that God will just ultimately forget about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think apologies in divorce have a I'm always trying to teach my kids, sorry, when you say sorry, you should be very concerned about the impact your action has had on another. When you're saying sorry, the sorry is not, I'm sorry, please don't hate me. The sorry is, I see that I have wounded you. I want to tend to the wound. The apologies that we usually get in divorce are a lot more the first kind, which is like, please just move on from me.
Right.
Like, please don't hold me accountable. It's not really, I hurt you. I'm sad. I want to make it better. That's rarely, I think, the intention.
The worst is when you're waiting for an apology from someone who probably never apologized for 10 years in a marriage. There's certain qualities that we almost expect sometimes after the divorce. And I mean, it was my therapist. I feel like every session she would say several times, if he was capable of that, you'd still be married.
That's right.
And it's like,
that's exactly right.
To expect an apology from someone if they have a lack of ownership or self-awareness or certain things, it's like, we do that, whether it's this or something, some other behavior. It's interesting how, like you have to remember, we're still the same people in a sense until the growth begins.
If it begins, yeah.
If it begins.
If it begins, let's hope.
Yeah.
Right. And that back to your original question about how do you move people into the spot of irrelevance? The fourth step is to profile your former partner, meaning writing down trust is, I always define trust as consistency over time. So people say, I can't trust my former partner. You can trust that they won't show up. They won't have the right stuff. They'll forget the thing. You can trust all of those things. That's the kind of profile that we want so that we're very clear on who it is we are talking to. People feel uncomfortable doing that because it feels critical. Well, it's not critical. It's more critical that you expect them to be somebody that they're not, just like you were saying. So how do I profile them and how do I make sure I'm texting that person? I'm showing up to events with that person. I'm parenting with that person so that I can start to make irrelevant my script that they get the glow up into who I think they ought to become. And frankly, who my co-parenting plan says they should become, right? Because our parenting plans often are far more aspirational than our real life can allow for. So how do I get out of that space so that I can, encounter reality? Because a big part of divorce recovery is being fiercely committed to telling yourself the truth.
Being in the here and now and not projecting something that you may want as opposed to dealing with really what's right in front of you.
What's right in front of you and the limits of your own influence in that.
Right.
When we have a 2-address family, we lose influence. Do not try to pretend that you can create 2 equivalent household experiences for your children. They have 2 very different experiences. The gift of you being the leaning in parent is, I'm going to help my children live with a foot in 2 different worlds and help translate those 2 different worlds for them and help to create a continuity to the difference as opposed to trying to create actual continuity with someone who has no interest in your great ideas.
I just wish you were my coach when I first got divorced. I'm like, the amount of time, all the things you're saying, waiting for the apologies, and just, I feel like that's why I'm excited to be coaching now, because I did all the things wrong for so many years.
Yeah, no, I think coaching is a lot about efficiency. You're not going to get out of having to walk through some of these steps, but there are definitely a lot of dead ends that can be avoided.
Leeron, what do you think you would coach yourself differently on with regard to what Andrea is talking about? If you could talk to yourself back when you were going through it.
Oh my God, make him irrelevant as soon as possible. Honestly, the amount of time that we fought and that I engaged, I just kept engaging in the mean texts and the harassment and the like picking and the, we would have these long fights in text. It was so exhausting for so long. That just feels like I could have moved on into my better place in life so much sooner, But yeah, I would say it is so important to be able to learn how to do that and to have just the co-parenting relationship, to really detach all those things. I wish I did that sooner, but it happened. Everyone's stories happens for a reason, but
but you did that, I think, because of the messaging, right? As
Yeah.
much as women, we're preoccupied with our bodies because we've grown up in a messaging of that kind of a culture. Divorce culture needs to be unwound.
Yeah.
Divorce is hard. It requires detachment. We aren't going to be buddy. There's a lot of difficulty. And I think we try to sell something that's got so many things that cause people to feel like they've failed because they think everyone else has such a great relationship. No, the people who have a great relationship usually have the benefit of time and distance, both of which take time.
Yeah, I mean, divorce is so traumatized. It's a trauma you're going through. That's why they say you're grieving. You're going through this trauma. And then you have some PTSD for a while. I mean, it's like any other traumatic experience. It really takes time to heal, and having coaches and having support is really so, I mean, we all know it's so important. I couldn't imagine doing this completely alone. I mean,
right.
Yeah. What about you, Noam?
When you talk about those, oh, sorry, go ahead.
What would I coach myself on during that time? I'd probably say, because again, the social media thing was it was a big move. It was a very big move when you think about it. Because it meant that I also had to be proactive in sharing certain things. Like I wanted her to be aware of certain things. I didn't want her to feel like she was missing out. Like if the boys had a great time at some experiences, I wanted her to see like their smiling faces. And so she could know that they were having a great time, so she could enjoy that too. And so if I were my coach, I'd probably give myself a pat on the back for saying that must have been a really hard and confusing thing to do, right? You're probably going to, realistically speaking, draw out some anger because people don't like being blocked, even if it is for a good and legitimate reason. And even if it has nothing to do with them, they still don't like being blocked. I wouldn't like being blocked, even if someone had a good and legitimate reason, that had nothing to do with me and more so to do with them. It would still feel weird. And so I think I would coach myself, or at least give myself a pat on the back by saying you made a tough but good decision that's going to open up your life in really beautiful ways and make this whole thing a little bit more bearable. Because it really has, right? It's just taken like any number of things out of sight, out of mind, right? And so I don't have to worry about that. And that feels really good. It feels really good. So I'd pat myself on the back, as I'm doing now. Thank you. Yes.
The path of grieving that you were talking about, the sort of 5 steps of grieving, they have added a 6th, which is making meaning. And I feel like that's kind of what both of you are describing is I was only able to make the meaning after I could get the distance from the story enough to be able to tell it differently. A lot of us try to make meaning from it while also being way too enmeshed and attached to the whole situation, when actually breaking some of the getting more divorced, as I call it. After you get more divorced, after being divorced, you can start to put a more tellable, believable, true, beautiful story to what it is that you've gone through, but really only on both of your stories, only on the back end of getting a lot more autonomous and a lot less attached.
It's funny because we talked about the 5 stages of grief when the podcast very first came out, like back in 2020 when we started this whole thing. And so obviously talking about grief related to divorce was huge, right? I mean, it's a central component to it. And we added, instead of meaning, we added mazel tov. Right. So it should be like when you get past it all and you've gotten to the stage of acceptance, it's now mazel tov, throw a party for yourself. Right. That sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. Good stuff.
Andrea, this has been wonderful. It really has been. You've been so generous with your time and especially with your wisdom and this precious and sacred guidance that could be useful to so many people going through divorce. Is there any particular message? We have this thing in our tradition of standing on one foot, explaining really complex things, right, in a very short period of time, while standing on one foot before you fall over. Could you sum up everything that you've said, right? If you were speaking to someone in your elevator pitch on one foot, what's really the benefit of all this?
You are entitled to your own perspective, and so is your former partner. And when you can enjoy the fact that those two things exist, you will have divorced well.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Folks, you can find Andrea Hipps on social media, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram at Andrea Hipps, divorce coach. Sometimes Andrea Hipps, divorce coach, LBSW. You can also find her at AndreaHippsDivorceCoach.com on the World Wide Webs. Andrea, is there any other way that people can get in touch with you, or how you like
Or
to
anything you'd
reach
like to
out or be
share
connected?
coming up?
Yeah.
Yeah, if people want to dive in a little bit more to this being irrelevant, I would love to share with them. I have a free webinar that I would be happy to send out that really gets into the steps for how to do that. If people want to just follow me on Instagram and DM me, that's probably the easiest way to find me, and I can send them a link to keep studying it, because it is a very it's a process, certainly not an aha moment. It's 1,000 ahas that build into the biggest moment of letting go. And I would love to be one of those ahas along the way.
Very
Oh,
nice. Very nice.
thank you
Thank you,
so
Andrea
much for
Hipps.
being here.
Absolutely.
Thank you, dears. This was wonderful. Thanks for having such an inspiring podcast, especially from a faith perspective that really helps a lot of people.
Oh, well, thank you. We're happy to contribute to the conversation. Leeron, if people want to follow along our conversation, where can they find us?
We are on Instagram and Facebook at the Jewish Divorce Project. You can also email us at thejewishdivorceproject@gmail.com. And you can follow Noam and myself on Instagram. You can find us all on the Jewish Divorce Project page.
Very nice.
We'd love to work with you all. Get to know everybody, that's all our listeners at some point.
And since Passover is coming, let's say Chag Pesach Sameach, Chag Kasher Sameach. May it be a holiday of liberation for you, certainly a holiday of peace for all of us around the world. May we enjoy what collective liberation looks like to a world that is full of peace and harmony between all. And may it be a meaningful time for all of us as we enter this sacred time together. Thank you so much, everyone.
If you're interested in becoming one of our sponsors or have questions and thoughts about the podcast, please email us at thejewishdivorceproject@gmail.com.
And you can always find us on social media at the Jewish Divorce Project on Facebook and Instagram.
And if you'd like to work with me, I specialize in divorce coaching for women. I can be found at mydivorceconcierge.com and on Facebook and Instagram at mydivorceconcierge.
And if you're interested in working with me for divorce coaching or spiritual coaching, I work with people of all kinds, of all backgrounds as well. My email address is noamrauscher@gmail.com. That's NOAMRAUCHER@gmail.com. And you can also find me on Facebook and on Instagram at Noam Rauscher.